I don't know if any of you have had any of those moments when it suddenly dawned on you and you understand something you haven't quite seen that way before. Those moments make good stories. Thank you, Karen, so much. Oh, you're ready. I don't know if you can hear me like this. I don't need the mic.
Yeah, you can hear you fine.
But for sure, tell me if you can't. Okay, I want to welcome you to the Yours Truly Storytelling Workshop members. And we've heard one story already, and there will be 5 more to come. And so I want to keep it going here. I'm going to introduce the next teller with her quote. I think I can remember it. There's no business like show business. Welcome, Patty Hollow.
Thank you. Well, I got a huge case of laryngitis this week, so I do need to use this. I don't think I could project any further. And it's a weird situation, but I'm going to have to stand here and talk and possibly breathe. Am I okay? Am I being heard? I'm being heard? Okay. The story is called No Shirley Temple, and you'll understand why. My family is part of movie history. My father worked at MGM, which was one of the biggest studios in the world. My grandmother was a bit actress who was always playing parts like maids and housemaids. And actually, I don't think I ever saw her anything less than a domestic uniform. She got good parts here and there, but nothing short of Gone with the Wind would have pleased her. And she was short on money, of course. She was raising me at the time. I was 5 years old. And it was also the time when child actresses were extremely popular, like Shirley Temple and Judy Garland a little later, and Margaret O'Brien, and these little girl stars were very big. So she took this serious look at me and decided that I was going to be the next Shirley Temple. Well, it was kind of laughable. But on the other hand, she decided to groom me. And by grooming me, she started off with my makeup. I was 5. She put rouge on and mascara that beaded made my eyes hurt, of course lipstick. And always, summer or winter, she threw a little muff around my neck so that all I can say is that when I looked at these photographs later, I looked like a child clown. And it was no wonder I never got the parts. And I did get sent out on a lot of parts because of who she was and where my father worked at MGM. And I was always sent back. With the first batch, they bring the little girls in, and the first little batch, you'd sit down and they'd take one look and they'd say, you can all go back to your mother. And that was what you kind of knew you didn't get the part. I cried all the way home. I didn't quite know what the part was, but I knew I was missing something. It happened on one of those days when she had me so gussied up with petticoats and ruffled panties and these corkscrew curls and a grosgrain bow on my head. I mean, I was just over the top. And I remember my father coming in on one of these days. He said, oh, he's British. For God's sakes, mother, no wonder she never gets the part. You have her dressed up like an overwrap box of See's candy. It will never work. I cried and I thought that was terrible, but I didn't know what See's candy was. It didn't matter. It made me feel really sticky and awful and not good. This grooming went on for many years, actually, and she had me practicing her accents and her ditties. She went from Cockney to broad English accent. She had me doing these displays of acting constant. It was constant. If somebody came into the house, she had me do one of her skits, and so I was really being pushed in that direction. And I did it. I was 5 years old. What did I know? I thought I was supposed to do it. I thought that was my life. I didn't know that there was some rejection involved. And I knew that it wasn't a real comfortable feeling. But it went on for years, this grooming and the auditions and the whole thing, and truly I never got anywhere with it. Thankfully, my father eventually remarried and we moved to the Hollywood Hills. And by that time I was able to get into Hollywood High School, which was the most revered high school in the world at that point for people who wanted to put their children into the movies. And they sent them. I had one particular friend whose family moved from Bakersfield and rented a little apartment so she could get a lot of the acting and the musical theater, and they had very, very good teachers. And that's what it was, and people came there, talent agents came there, and Lana Turner was discovered, Judy Garland, maybe not discovered, but that's what they were all looking for, another Judy Garland. And it went on forever, and Hollywood High was kind of the thing that brought me out of this childhood experience, which actually, I guess, was somewhat traumatizing. I laugh at it now, but I remember thinking it wasn't so funny at the time. Eventually, though, I got the lead in the big Hollywood High production. It was called Lady Audley's Secret, and it was a great play. It was an 1890 melodrama, and a melodrama in those days when I was Lady Audley, and I was brought and you talked like this, and you talked to the audience so that I was a villainess, and I talked to them and I warned them that I was going to murder somebody. I mean, it had comic overtones, but it was very funny, and I was very excited, and when I was taken to Western costume for my big wig and my beautiful gown, I was on top of the world. Well, when it finally came for my first performance, there was my grandmother sitting in the first row with a horrible grimace on her face. And it unnerved me. I remember thinking, I'm going to try to get through this, and I got nervous in the first act, and still nervous a little bit in the second act, but by the third act I was flying through it, and it was a great performance, and people loved it. And in fact, we were even taken during the summer, did little theater in Santa Monica, and I think we even got a bit of pay for it, because it was tight, it was a tight, good performance. However, my grandmother was horrified. She said, how could they put you in such a tawdry performance? She said, after all those years of coaching, and what happened to your beautiful accent? And she went on and on and on, and I finally gave up. I just gave up. I couldn't please her. I never could please her. She wanted me to be a movie star, and I never was. She expected me to marry a talent manager, someone like Judy Garland, whose husband groomed her and made her a star, wasn't going to do that. And by the time I was in my 40s, I had met my second husband, and she wanted to know, would he manage my career? And he had never even been to a live performance, so it wasn't it was his calling in life to become a manager of a movie star potential, which I never was and never was going to be. And at any rate, we finally went through all of that, and she died finally. I mean, it was a sort of a relief that she died. But as she went through this, and you know, I don't remember paying much attention to it. My poor father, as much as she sort of nagged me to death, she did the same thing to him. She threw him into boarding schools all over Europe when she was on the stage and a little bit more well known at the time. And I said to him one day, I said, Father, how do you feel now that Gran is dead? He said, oh, relief, Patricia, I only feel And I said, oh, me too. I said, the only thing is, I sometimes feel sad, but you know, that was the way it was. It wasn't any big thing. And I knew it was a hopeless situation. So, but she still wanted credit. I still felt in her mind, she never got the credit that she thought she was going to get for doing all this work with me. And I couldn't get much further than that. And I let it go. And then one day, this is decades after this happened, I was reading the calendar section of the Times, and there she was with Laurel and Hardy on the page with a baby buggy, and it was some revival of their show called The Stairs. It said, featuring Lily and Aunt Lily Irene. I went, oh my God, this is remarkable. There's my grandmother. And so I didn't quite know what to do with it. So I sent the whole article off to my granddaughter, who's a story editor, and I said, see what this means. This is your great-grandmother. And I said, I guess she helped start Screen Actors Guild and all of that, but I said, I don't know what this is all about. So sure enough, she's very good that way. She researched it, and this was a big new homage to the Laurel and Hardy films. And one of their first big films was called The Stairs. And they were bringing it back, and they were having a big kind of festival, a small festival, for all the people who love Laurel and Hardy movies. And they did an endless loop tape of this particular film, The Stairs. They had a plaque on where the stairs were. It said featuring Laurel and Hardy's film, The Stairs, which had won awards. And they did a big deal. They gave us candies and balloons, and they had photographers there and wanted to take the pictures of anybody who had been involved with Gran, well, not with Gran, with anybody with Laurel and Hardy. And being the granddaughter, I grabbed my granddaughter and pulled her into it. It was a fun day, and we said goodbye to everybody. And then I was surprised. About 2 months later, I got a call that said these people who had put this together, wanted to do another little talk in front of a lot of Hollywood movie buffs that were, they had built a museum right across the street from the Hollywood Bowl. It was called the Hollywood Museum. And all these old movie buffs would come, and they just wanted something. They wanted a little bit of a talk from somebody who'd been part of it. And they asked me, I took it very lightly. In fact, I didn't pay much attention to it. My husband, my granddaughter, and I went out to dinner at the Japanese Gardens, and it was right across from the street from the Hollywood Bowl where I lived. And I kind of showed up late and didn't think a thing, and think, oh, you're here. Can you please give us a talk? And I said, okay. Thankfully, I had a glass of wine by then. And I got up and I started just saying what I knew and how she was, and all of the things that she aspired to be, all the old actresses like Beatrice Lilly and the Vaudeville Times, and I just chatted around, and that was it. And I guess I went over very well. Everybody applauded, and when we got off the stage, they took us around to show us replicas of the Paramount soundstage, which was very important. And they had pictures of everybody everywhere, and they kept saying, thank you so much for showing up. They were looking, I think, for anybody who had any connection. And I thought it was kind of fun. And they went on, and how wonderful it was that I had shown up, and they were showing everything. And I got the best feeling. The best feeling was the poor Gran, who really never, ever got any recognition, or at least what she expected to get in her whole life. And I kind of looked up and gave her a nod, and I said, well, you finally made it, Gran.
Thank you, Kathy. Your voice held up.
Did it? I would be
Our next storyteller has this quote by George Bernard Shaw. You don't stop laughing when you grow old. You grow old when you stop laughing. Welcome, Lydia Cruz Montcliffe.
Well, I want to dedicate this presentation to old people, only if they're cool old people. The title of my story is, Am I Too Old for That? It was one of those mornings that getting old was getting to me. It was the old aches and pains that go away after a while, but that morning, I also woke up very grumpy for no apparent reason. When that happened to me, I know I need an attitude adjustment, and I call a friend. But who should I call this time? I know. I'll call Katsuko. I haven't heard from her for a while, and she's a great listener. After catching up with each other's lives, I confessed to her that I was feeling grumpy and a little gloomy. That even though I'm always busy, I needed something new and challenging. She thought for a minute and then said, I got it. How about watercolor painting? I'm glad we were on the phone. Otherwise, she would have seen my bratty teenager attitude, rolling my eyes to the back of my head and saying, "Estás loca? I'm 68 years old. I'm too old for that." But of course I didn't say that. I said something worse. Easy for you to say. You're a great painter. You've been painting for a long time. I bet you've been painting since you were a child. I never had the opportunity. I cannot even paint two sticks together. Sounding a tad offended, Katsuko said, "Well, let me tell you, Lydia, I learned to paint at the senior center, and I started in my 60s. I did practice every day. That's how you get better. I learned on my own, and if I did it, you can do it." Just like that, my attitude was adjusted. Of course, I apologized to her. "I'm sorry, you're such a good friend. I've been so rude, and you're trying to help me. Please, let me think about your idea. Thank you." The next day, as I'm lurking on my Facebook page, what do I see? An ad for watercolor painting for beginners. What? After getting over the shock that now Facebook can read my mind, I read the details. 25 lessons for $27, all recorded. Wow. And it was the deal of the year. Wow. I bought the lessons. I bought them because Katsuko told me, and because it was a sign from the universe and from Facebook that I had to stop being so grumpy and be more open-minded. But before I started my lessons, I made myself a promise. I was going to have fun with my lessons, laugh at my mistakes, ignore any negative comment, and I was not going to follow the art world rules if I didn't want to. I wanted to have fun. Then I had two questions. Question number one, who are famous watercolor painters, specifically watercolor painters? I found out that Paul Sandy is considered the father of watercolor. Winslow Homer is one of the most prominent American painters. He's famous for his landscapes. And then I wanted to know more about a woman watercolor painter. And how about Georgia O'Keeffe? She was a pioneer in the late 20s for her simplistic way of painting. Remember the giant flowers? And my second question was, what is the most expensive watercolor painting ever sold? Well, I found out it's called The Stacks of Wheat by Vincent van Gogh. Yes, he had a period in his life in which he used watercolors. That painting was sold last November for $35.9 million. I was so excited. I was ready to start. I started my lessons, and from the beginning I fell in love with painting. When you mix the colors with water and gets all those shades, it's like pure magic. Well, sometimes it was pure muddy waters, because if you mix too many colors, it gets muddy, but that's okay. Watercolor painting is very relaxing. One time, I was so wrapped up painting that I started painting with my hot tea and drinking muddy water. I know I have a lot to learn, but the child in me is screaming, yes, thank you for giving painting a chance. My family and friends support me. My husband set up a clothesline in one bedroom in which I can hang up all my paintings. Now I can paint flowers and leaves and also the stems. Sometimes I look at my instructor's painting that is so beautiful, and then I do it and look at mine, then it's a little scary sometimes, so I say to myself, it doesn't matter. Move on, Lydia. When it dries up, it gets a little better. But when I'm in real doubt, I think of a quote by Vincent van Gogh. He said, if you hear a voice within you telling you that you cannot paint, by any means, keep on painting, and that voice will be silenced. Painting has given me a new appreciation of colors. For instance, the sunset is not anymore red, yellow, and orange. Now I can see dusty pink and lilac and periwinkle blue. I also learned new names for colors like Gogh. Gogh is a dark yellow in the sunset. It's not the bright or lemony yellow, it's the darker one. And that color, every time I see it, brings a smile to my face, because it brings back a memory, childhood memory, being in Puerto Rico in a very hot and muggy day with my tons of cousins and siblings, and eating a snow cone with that color. To this day, I don't know what flavor it was, but I know I like that color in that snow cone. At this point in my life, I want to enjoy my memories, but honestly, I want to create new memories. I'm not too old for that. I have a friend in her 70s learning to play the ukulele. My husband, who is 2 years older than me, went to the Grand Canyon with some friends and started in the South Rim, hiked down to the bottom, and came up to the North Rim. I have a neighbor who is in her 80s, and she just got a boyfriend. And how about my friend Katsuko, who is in her late 80s, and she gave me this gift of painting. We're old, but we're not done. Even now, when I get my old aches and pains, and sometimes a tad grumpy, I say, the heck with it, I'm going to paint. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lisa. Okay, I'm going to introduce the next teller with his quote. Do we need a little break now? Anyone need to go to the bathroom? Okay. His quote, "Thank you for the past. I welcome the future." Sam Hollow.
thank you, Lydia, that was great. Every time I hear it, I enjoy it more. There must be something special about that. The name of my story is Coming Full Circle. The circle of life: selection, birth, life, death, rebirth. I started out the second part of this life with my wife on a journey, sort of having our midlife experience together, to find another place to live besides California. Usually, in a house, the kids grow up and they move out. This time, the parents moved out. And we drove our little camper across the United States up into Canada to find another place that we'd like to live. We settled on a small town by Golden, Colorado called Evergreen. We found a little 500 square foot cabin. It was built in 1935 and decided to call this home. After 18 months of my work as a contractor and my wife's ability decorating on a dime, we deemed our 3,800 square foot room addition complete. Now during this time, we got involved in the mountain community. Patty was started in a writing class and an acting class, and I got involved in the healing art of Reiki. We so enjoyed ourselves when we gathered a great group of friends. One of those friends, knowing that I was clever as a builder, said, "Will you help me build a labyrinth?" And I said, "Yeah." But usually when somebody says, "Will you help me?" what they mean is, "Will you do something for free?" So I said, "Yeah, I'll do it as long as I get help." So we got together, we gathered some stones. She showed me where she wanted on the lower area of her property that was deemed a very auspicious high energy spot. And it was to be a 7-circuit Cretan labyrinth. It was my first time working with stone for a labyrinth. I had laid a lot of stone, I had built a lot of waterfalls in my life, but it was the first time I built a walking path, specifically as a guided meditation. So that's where I had my energy while I was building it. After it was finished, she invited everybody over to walk it. And in the evening, we walked out on her rear patio. We could look down on the labyrinth, and she had votive candles around it. It appeared to be shimmering and floating. And the energy that it was emanating was really, really strong, sort of like a kinetic energy that you could feel. And as we were walking down the path, we had to hold each other's hands because we were kind of affected by it, a little bit dizzy. So we walked it, and when we were all done, we stood around and did a prayer afterwards. Later that evening when I was at home, I had a hard time falling asleep, that energy coursing through my body, thinking, wow, that's really something. A few days later, I went back and walked it during the day, a couple of times, and each time I walked it, the energy became more ingrained in me and a little bit softer. A little while after that, another friend said, "Because you had built this labyrinth, would you help with our church? They want to build a labyrinth." Funny thing is, when I walked in today, I walked over to the counter there, and there's a labyrinth right outside here. It's very nice. 12-circuit Sharks labyrinth. And that's what I decided to build for this church. So I discussed it with the minister, and this minister was taking over a very difficult situation from the prior minister. I didn't know any of the particulars, but all I knew is that the guy had to get out of town. And this minister is a little Vietnamese woman, 4'7", but talk about energy and determination. She really had drive, and she said, "Would you please do this for our parish?" I said, "Yeah, why don't I give them a talk maybe after service on Sunday and see how they feel about it." So I went to the service. After the service, I gave a little presentation, got everybody excited about it, and they agreed to it. So she told me I could build it out on this grassy area by the stream. I should select the spot. So I did a little prayer, and I said, "Dear God, please enter me. Show me where I should bring that energy to the earth." I walked out there with a metal stake and my sledgehammer. I walked around until I felt the spot. put the stake down and hit it with my hammer. And that was the center point of the labyrinth of the Church of the Transfiguration. Now I had to start building it. So I ended up, put a string in the middle, I went out 27 feet radius, took a chalk line, drew a circle all the way around, got a sod cutter, and this isn't just thin grass, this is some really thick stuff. So I finally got through it. I ended up taking over 20 tons of sod out of this area, 54 feet across, about 3,800 square feet. Coincidentally, just about the same size as the house I built. I hauled away all that, and I brought in the base, another 20 tons of base. I did this all by myself. It took me about maybe four or 5 weeks. I worked every day on it, and it was really more than I should have been able to do by myself. I did have my little tractor, and the strange thing is, there was a little red fox that lived right off in the brush. And she would come out every day and sort of look at me, you know, skeptical of what I was doing to her space. And I was always very respectful. I'd turn the tractor off as she came out, I'd sit down, and if I was having lunch, I'd leave a little bit out for her and she'd come over and nibble on it. I knew I had her permission when she came out and spotted in the middle of the labyrinth. I said, ha-ha, I've got permission, I can go ahead with the project. So I went ahead and brought in cobblestone and set the intersections, and then after service one Sunday, the parishioners came out and helped me set all the stones on all the pathways. And I was there adjusting the stones and making sure they were interlocked and touching each other all the way through. The interesting thing, as the last stones went together, that little click, that resonant energy came right out of that labyrinth. And when the people started walking in and taking their time, and it does take about 40 minutes to walk in, do your prayer, and walk out, you have to hold the proper intention. I had reporters come up from the newspaper. This one gal came up and she knew everything, right? She'd seen other labyrinths. She came up and she looked at this and asked me why I built it and all this. And she wanted to walk into the center of the labyrinth. I said, no problem, but please respect what it is. Walk the lanes. So she walked 2 or 3 times around and then she went, I don't have time for this. Out of there. She couldn't get into the energetic. You really need to fall into it. It's really a prayer. It's an intersection between earth and heaven. And you open up your heart. It's really wonderful. Well, that was about 20 years ago. Every time I go back to Evergreen to work on my house or whatever, I take enough time to go down to my labyrinth. And it's still there. It still looks pretty good. And being the good mother that I am, I walk the labyrinth and I adjust the stones here and there, put little crystals at this intersection and that intersection. And I just stand there and I look at it and I go, this was the right thing to do for this community. It was the right thing to bring on earth at this spot, and it just glows, and the resonant energy still stays there after 20 years. Thank you very much.
Sam, that labyrinth was right near where there was a big school shooting.
Yeah, right by Columbine, maybe 5 miles away.
Wow. Yeah, I bet some people at Columbine used it.
Actually, I sent some requests to Columbine if they'd like to have a labyrinth, but it was so tender at the time that they couldn't do it. Since then, they have built one, but it took a while until it was time for them to do it.
Thank you, Sam.
You're welcome.
Okay, we have another teller, and this is her quote by Rumi. Do not feel lonely. The whole universe is inside you. Welcome, Debbie Palmer-Segal.
Thank you, Anna. Can you hear me?
Yes.
My story is called Louie Louie. Louie, 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 Louie. It's a song song that reminds me of when I was 14 years old. My twin sister, Ruth Ann, and I flew to New York to visit our father for the first time. It was a big deal. Our father was single, and he looked like a movie star, but he was a stranger to us. He was kind, but very awkward around two teenage girls. Ruth Ann looked exactly like my dad. She had his larger-than-life green eyes, wide forehead, high cheekbones, and golden hair. I, on the other hand, looked nothing like my dad. I inherited his meaty thighs. Was told that I walked just like him, which was horrifying because my dad walked like a gorilla. Luckily, I discovered yoga. According to our mom, Ruth Ann was the pretty one, and I was the smart one. We spent 2 weeks in New York, mostly at Jones's and Rockaway beaches. It's the most time I ever spent on the ocean's edge, and I was in love. That warm sun, the cool breezes, the sparkling waters, the squishy wet sand between my toes. The beaches in New York were a new connection for me to Mother Nature and men. Both nourishing, exciting. That summer of 1973 was the first time in my life that all the boys wanted to be with me. I was not used to being the center of attention. Growing up with 3 beautiful sisters, I was invisible. I remember all the lifeguards were so friendly. I remember thinking, boy, New York is really different than California. I didn't understand it at the time, but I enjoyed it. The power I felt was visible. Ruth Ann, for the first time, was invisible. I had boobs. Ruth Ann did not. So my twin promptly flew back to California after 2 weeks, and I happily stayed in New York the entire summer. It was the beginning of us going down 2 separate paths. We had started drinking. For me, it was fun. For Ruth Ann, it was a disaster. According to our mom, Ruth Ann was the pretty one. I was the smart one. It was odd at first being separated from my twin. I was in a new world, and I was surrounded with delight. I did not miss Ruth Ann. The entire summer was a party. It felt like a fairy tale. My dad worked full-time, trimming trees in New York City parks. He took me to Aikido classes, and there, I remember I liked the physical, mental, and spiritual discipline those classes required. It opened a new door for me, that and having a toned and agile body. My dad wanted me to learn boxing. He was a trainer at a local gym on the side. Bend your knees and move around a lot, he'd say, like Ali. Dance like a butterfly, but sting like a bee. He told me stories about Sugar Ray Leonard and Tommy Hearns. Sugar Ray being the smart boxer, Tommy Hearns. Sugar Ray being the pretty boxer, Tommy Hearns being so smart. We never did make it to the gym, but he taught me how to throw a punch. Stand at an angle. Step into it. Hold your fist high, close to your face, and always pull back on the punch quickly. My dad teaching me how to punch was empowering. I tested that punch on Ruth Ann when I returned home from California. We fought often, and I was happy to acquire new skills. I celebrated my 15th birthday in New York without Ruth Ann. I cried. I could not believe I was only turning 15. After lying all summer, telling all I was 18 so that I could drink, I actually began to believe the lie. It's scary how a repeated, known lie could so easily slip into a believed truth. So at 14, I received my first kiss. It was salty and sandy, a novelty. I wanted to explore that, and dancing on the beach singing, Louie, 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 was my first summer without my twin. The plane ride home was icing on the cake. It was my first solo flight, and still the best. I met a beautiful stranger who was amorous and sweet. The flight was empty. We spent our entire time together. He looked like that model on all the paperback romance novels. He's wearing a suit, long blonde hair, strong jaw, full lips. He was handsome, and he was a mysterious stranger who glamorized me. I even let him kiss me. I will always be grateful for that plane ride from New York to California and his enamored company. I will always be grateful for that summer in New York. For the next 15 years, I became quite used to being the center of attention. Humility was not my strong point. I'd gotten used to men going out of their way to make my life more easy. I worked full-time, put myself through college, got my BA, married a loving, successful man, and had a beautiful baby girl at 28. Those years weren't easy, but I had no idea how privileged I was until I had a couple of brain surgeries right after my 30th birthday. Most women see their beauty slowly fade over the years. For me, it was overnight. My face was forever changed. 50% of my facial nerves were severed. I was forced to focus on inner beauty. Focusing on spiritual disciplines, prayer, yoga, and service had always been a big part of my life, but now it became a lifesaver. Oh, my beloved, kindness of the heart, I bow to thee. I prayed earnestly for my true beauty to shine through my Picasso face. Mom always told me, you're older, you're the responsible one. When we were 5 years old, she sent Ruth Ann and I away to camp. There, I was reprimanded by a counselor for picking up after Ruth Ann. I responded, it's my job. When we were 15, Ruth Ann and I snuck out to go to the California Jam. As I was climbing in our bedroom window, Mom was standing there with that belt in her hands. She let me have it. She did not touch Ruth Ann. I cried out, hey! She climbed in that same window. Mom responded, you're older. You're responsible. Mom was doing her best. I just didn't get it at the time. Now at 63, I visit my twin in a nursing home. It is a difficult visit. I have to bring a friend. Seeing Ruth Ann alone is too painful. Her years of alcoholism were not kind to her. I pray for her and know that she is a child of God, a free spirit, and a loving person. I am so grateful I did not go down her path. I am so sorry I did not prevent Ruth Ann from going down hers. God bless my twin. God bless us all. Oh, and I am supposed to introduce our leader and our teacher, Ann Buxey. Woo! And I don't remember your quote.
Thank you, Debbie. The title of my story is Good Grief. Good grief was just an exclamation I used when I was speechless. Little did I know how those two words would fly home to roost. Years of trumpery and trash talk, then another viral attack, COVID. This grief wasn't feeling so good. More like being wrapped in barbed wire. Jeez. I'm just going up, forgetting everything. These stories have been so good. And I didn't bring my papers because I'm the leader. I does anyone remember where I go next? Huh?
I don't know, the bug, maybe?
Oh, yeah, that'll get close. Well, where did I end up? The grief wasn't feeling so good. Yeah. I'm sorry, you know what? I'm just going up on this.
The bug in the room? The bug in the
Yeah, I could just go there.
Yeah.
Thank you. I know it,
She's saying about your dad.
Did you extend your
Yeah.
one?
oh, there are all these bits and pieces coming to me. And they're good, and they're part of the story.
And we love the sun.
The field.
And dark matter. And
we
we've all
We've been there, for
We've
sure.
been there.
Yeah, you all have, but, this is just, yeah. Felt more like barbed wire. Yeah, I'm just stuck at this place. Felt more like barbed wire. I needed to do something. I'll just skip all over the place. We talked to my husband, because I wasn't feeling so good. I knew I needed help. And he heard me call for help, and he came to the bedroom. And I said, it's a bug. I can't go to sleep with it racing around in here. I kept trying to catch it, kept getting away. It stood up against the baseboard now. My husband and I are approaching our low water mark, our mid-70s. We're not as agile as we used to be, and we avoid sudden movements. We bent over slowly, peering at it. What kind of bug is it, Rick asked. I said, it has a lot of legs. It's a fast little bugger. Rick terminated that episode. That bug wouldn't live to see another day. We straightened up slowly, holding on to each other. And suddenly I saw how old we'd become. And I couldn't stop laughing. I'm still laughing. Rick tells me his idea. It's for a t-shirt, he said. I want to wear one that says dark matter. If you saw my husband, tall, black, wearing a t-shirt that said dark matter, you might think it redundant. But it might also, you might pause, all the toxic backlash to Black Lives Matter. It all dissolves in dark matter. Dark matter rules that invincible, inexplicable cosmic force. We were laughing, it felt great. But sometimes I needed another kind of help from my sad. A friend noticed. She asked what's wrong. I trusted her enough to admit. The last few years have taken a toll on me, I said. Feels as if my insides have imploded, as if the world I depended on, where the pursuit of happiness was possible, it's not there anymore. I was stymied. Another friend described her sister to me. She's never particularly happy. She's never particularly sad. Well, great, I thought. I wanted more than that. I wanted to want to wake up in the morning, to pursue happiness. But everywhere I looked, I was reminded of sad. The coyotes yip and howl at night reminded me of how we poison their food chain. The field across the street, empty, plowed up, it used to be full of life, of anise and mustard and red-winged blackbirds. Their calls haunted my morning. They're all gone now. And the cricket, one cricket, not a chorus, one cricket, rubbing his song into the night, calling for a mate. We've de-skirted our palm trees for fire safety. Now the hooded orioles, who return to these palms season after season, have no cover, no place to nest. Yes, I'm sad. It's wound tight in me, like a rattler, like the baby rattlesnake my husband found outside our door. She was coiled at the base of a palm tree, beautiful, innocent, her scales grand, shiny, new. She needed to be handled carefully. I needed to handle my sadness carefully. A friend had reminded me years ago, we've already lost. It was the shock I needed to accept the losses, to accept the momentum of this catastrophe of our own making. What now? I talked to my husband about embracing a new opportunity. He told me you have to have a decision you can defend, even if it's only your resolve. Well, I knew one thing, I needed to grow again. Nature tells me when fruit is ripe, it's time. Was I ripe enough? Resolved enough? In September 2021, Malibu City Council consented to my appointment as Poet Laureate. I was eager again. I began preparing. I needed to define poetry. Poetry that roots and grows a community. Poetry that nourishes and challenges its visions. And I needed to keep exploring my own sadness. I began to understand grief as a tender mercy. I'll always be touched by sadness, how the lives and dreams of generations are stolen, how the earth is plundered. The Japanese know this. They have a phrase for it. Translated, it means a sadness of things. Seamus Heaney, a poet, calls it tears at the heart of things. When my tears well up, another's faith rescues me. Donna's prayer. Thank you, Lord, for encamping your angels around me to protect me and keep me safe at all times. See, in my sadness, I would forget God's presence, her keeping, the light at the heart of dark matter. And Roxanne, her encouragement. Keep moving forward, dear friend, as I am, even in my sadness. I still get up, gratefully so. Sometimes I just needed to follow in another's footsteps, to trust that when I swing my legs out of bed in the morning, someone else is doing the same thing, gratefully. I can't refuse to let joy be obliterated. Sadness is at the heart of things, but so is happiness. Becoming Poet Laureate has forced me to extend myself in ways I never would have, forced me to accept my authority, to trust. I am ripe enough, resolved enough to share my truth, a truth worth no more or less than yours. I'm no longer apologizing for my sadness or for my life. That would be like asking a palm tree to apologize for not being a pine tree. This appointment requires that I continue to listen and to forgive. It's the debt I owe this chance, this life given me, to listen, to forgive. grief no longer paralyzes me. It does strike. I mean, when the heart breaks or its wisdom is violated, how could it not? My dad used to ask me, what do you make of that? Well, good and blessed grief for what she is making of me. I notice small moments of joy now. The stranger at CBS greeting me with such cheer, his blue eyes sparkling, dancing above his mask. The flowers on my morning hike blooming their yellow joy for all the world to see. Grief may be battle-torn, but her tears are wisdoms, are mercies. They have ripened me. My journey with grief and the opportunity of Laureate have brought my life into purpose. Thanks to good and blessed grief, and thank you, good grief, for listening. Now, you can ask anybody questions now if you want about any of their stories. Don't ask me for the part I forgot.
What was your quote at?
Say,
What was your quote?
my quote?
Yeah, we never got your quote.
Oh, yeah. I think Amanda Gorman referred to it, but fear has become kind of interesting in my life. She said, if you're alive, you're afraid. And I realized when I applied for Laureate and then became Laureate, that it's forcing me to really do things that I wouldn't have done. I know I wouldn't have done them. But it's expected of you, and so I would have been afraid to do them, Ilya. I would have been afraid to try. So that made sense to me when I read that, because Amanda Gorman almost did not read her poem because she was afraid. I mean, people had told her not to.
Who?
Friends had told Amanda Gorman not to read the poem because she was getting death threats.
Wow.
I mean, yeah, what happens when you're not this color, when you're another color? You live in another world.
Yeah.
But so I like that quote. It made more sense to me, Ilya, after I've experienced the last, few months. If you're alive, you're afraid. I mean, I don't call myself being afraid all the time, but we live lives of habit. My habit keeps me, I have a pretty comfortable life. Why do I want to go and do so? Habit holds you in a certain condition, and that can be not good. Because if you want to keep growing, you can't just stay like that. So anyway, I went on too long, but that was the quote. If you're alive, you're
That was
afraid.
beautiful.
Yeah. That made up for forgetting. Okay, well, thank you all for coming. Yeah.